One world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. It is July 1st, 2012. This is the Sunday edition of Down the Rabbit Hole, and today I have a special treat for you guys. I'm going to be going over something called the Stanford Prison Experiment, and then I'm going to be playing an interview with Alan Watt where he discusses a lot of the manipulation and control, the level, who it is, and how long it's been going on and stuff, and it all correlates together. But the first thing I wanted to touch on was the Stanford Prison Experiment. Now, a lot of you have probably never heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment. Some of you may have heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment. It was a study of the psychological effects of becoming a prisoner or prison guard. It was conducted from August 14th to August 20th, back in 1971, by a team of researchers led by a psychology professor by the name of Philip Zimbardo. And this was all taking place at Stanford University in, obviously, the early 70s, 1971. Now, this is interesting because this is right at the end of the Vietnam War era, right? And look who it's funded by. The U.S. Office of Naval Research. Okay? Because it was the outcome was of interest to the U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps in order to determine the causes of conflict between military guards and prisoners. 24 students were selected out of 75 to play prisoners and live in a mock prison in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Building on the college grounds. Roles were assigned randomly, so it wasn't like, Bob, I like you, you're going to be a guard. It was just, you're going to be prisoners, you're going to be a guard. And the participants adapted to their roles well beyond what even Zimbardo, the professor that put it together, had expected. Leading the officers, I'm doing air quotes, the officers, the people that portrayed the officers, to display authoritarian measures and ultimately to subject some of the prisoners to torture. Now, this was an experiment. It only took place over 6 days. Wait till you see, you're going to hear what happened. In turn, many of the prisoners developed passive attitudes and accepted physical abuse, and at the request of the guards, readily inflicted punishment on other prisoners who attempted to stop it. I'm going to read that again. Many of the prisoners developed passive attitudes and accepted physical abuse, and at the request of the guards, readily inflicted punishment on other prisoners who attempted to stop it. Sound anything like what we're going through today? When you try to tell somebody, hey, things are crazy. Shut up. Shut your mouth. It could be coming from someone that has no clue what they're talking about. But they will fight to defend that. And this is all done on purpose because these elitists, these people that study human nature, they want to see how people are going to react. And this was done, 50 years ago, I think now? Well, no, 71. So that's 40 years ago. Excuse me, 40 years ago this experiment was done. You don't think that they've learned anything over the past 40 years about how to control and manipulate people? It's exactly what this pretty much was doing. Unbelievable. All right, well, I'm going to get in. Let me get into the audio. Let me get the audio queued up here for you guys. And it's interesting because the guy who put the whole thing together, Zimbardo, he got so into it, he even himself got affected by it and thought he was actually the prison warden. You'll hear him talk about that. It was abruptly stopped after 6 days. It was actually going to go on longer than that, but they had to stop it because they realized where it was going and what was going on. I mean, this was just an experiment, and the guys involved in the experiment got caught up in it to where they thought it was a reality, and they actually started to act like prison guards and torture people. Basically, it shows that even good people, not people that are sadistic, evil, wishing to control others, anything like that, even normal people put in the wrong circumstances can turn out to be just as bad as somebody who already has it in them. Now, I've said this before, we all have a dark side and a light side. It's a 50-50 fight every day. It's like the old, there's a proverb about an Indian and an old Indian and a little Indian. And the older Indian's talking to the little one, and he's explaining to him that inside of us all we have a white wolf and a dark wolf, a black one. And it represents good and evil, and it's constantly fighting inside of us to control us as an individual. Each person has this. And the little Indian says to the older one, well, which one wins the fight? And the old one looks at him and says, the one you feed. So if you feed the dark side that we all have, if you feed into that, if you allow your environment to feed into that, it can create and turn you into something that people would never, ever believe you could be. A monster, if you will. And it's amazing what can happen to somebody when they're put in a situation like that. Look at what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan and any of these other countries that we've invaded that we don't hear about. But we'll use the occupation of Afghanistan and the occupation of Iraq as an example. Look at the horrible war crimes you've heard me come on air and talk about multiple times. The things that PFC John Needham went through. You guys have heard me talk about it. You've heard me go over this a bazillion times. Why did a lot of that stuff happen? Some of them may have been sadistic, but that's not really why it happened. It didn't happen because, yes, sadistic people do make it into the military, just like sadistic people make it into the police force and anything else. But that's not why it happened. It happened because people allowed themselves to embrace the dark side. Doesn't matter. They didn't have to be the Pope or that's a bad example because he's an evil piece of crap. Didn't have to be like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. or anything like that before they went in. They could. I mean, there could be. Well, not could be. There are some sociopaths and nuts that do join the military, but as a whole, it's the conditioning. It's that dark side. It's allowing yourself to let that in. And once you let that in, it doesn't matter if you let it in just a little bit. Oh, I'll just let it in a little bit because I need that to help me. No. You let it in even the slightest bit. It's like a vampire. You let it in and it's over. It's like the government. You give it an inch, they take a mile. That's the way the darkness works. And if we allow ourselves to buy into it even in the slightest bit, it will permeate your body, get into your soul, and change you, and not for the better. When we come back, coming back in from break, I'm going to play the Stanford Prison Experiment. I'm going to let you hear the audio from it. You're going to hear right from the participants themselves. Interesting to say the least. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen, and without further ado, let me bring to you the Stanford Prison Experiment. Strap yourselves in, because this one's going to be a little bumpy.
Stanford University, Northern California, one of America's most prestigious academic institutions, and in 1971, the scene of one of the most notorious experiments in the history of psychology.
I was interested in what happens if you put good people in an evil place. Does the situation outside of you, the institution, come to control your behavior, or does the things inside of you, your attitudes, your values, your morality, allow you to rise above a negative environment?
The negative environment Zimbardo chose to test his ideas was a prison. He would convert the basement of the university's psychology department into a subterranean jail.
We put prison doors on each of 3 office cells. In the cells, there was nothing but 3 beds, and there was actually very little room for anything else because they were very small. And here we had solitary confinement, which we call the hole. And in the hole was the place where prisoners would be put for punishment. It was a very, very small area. When you closed the door, it was totally dark. All the guards wore military uniforms, and we had them wear these silver reflecting sunglasses. And what it does is you can't see someone's eyes, and so that loses some of the humanness, the humanity. In general, we wanted to create a sense of power. That is, the guards, as a category, are people who have power over others. In this case, power over the prisoners.
A decade earlier, psychologist Stanley Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud, horse, rock, house. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer, horse.
Oh. Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
You refuse to go on? The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're going to get a shock. 180 volts.
Ow! I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man, eh? I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music. And
2/3 of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering with less voltage. Can't you check in and see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis. Like Milgram, Zimbardo was interested in the power of social situations to overwhelm individuals. His experiment would test people's responses to an oppressive regime. Would they accept it or act against it? Zimbardo's experiment was conducted against a backdrop of civil rights activism and protest against the Vietnam War.
There was a sense of student power, student dominance, and student rebellion against authority in general.
It was from the student body that Zimbardo selected his participants. After passing tests to screen out anyone with a psychological abnormality, they were paid $15 a day. Each was randomly assigned to the role of guard or prisoner.
It was a prison to me. It still is a prison to me. I don't look on it as an experiment or a simulation. It's just a prison that was run by psychologists instead of run by the state.
I was 20, and that September I was going to college, and it would be nice to have a summer job, but there sure wasn't a lot of time left. And I looked in the want ads, and I found this thing which was just going to fit. It was just 2 weeks.
Once you put a uniform on and are given a job to keep these people in line, you really become that person. Once you put on that khaki uniform, you put on the glasses, you take the nightstick.
I was on summer break from my first year in college, and I was looking for a job. Had to choose between that and making pizzas. That sounded like a lot more fun.
As well as running the experiment, Zimbardo took on the role of prison superintendent. He began by briefing the guards.
I said, you have to maintain law and order. If prisoners escape, the study is over, and you can't use physical violence.
You can't create a sense of fear in them. You can't create the notion that their life is totally controlled by us, and that there'll be constant surveillance. We have total power in the situation, and they have none.
Prisoners were brought to the basement prison, blindfolded, to confuse them about their whereabouts. They were stripped and deloused.
Of course, the guards started making fun of their genitals and humiliating them. And really, it's the start of what's known as the degradation process, which not only prisons, but lots of military-type outfits use that process.
When I first got here, even though I had to strip, when they would call me names, I still didn't feel at all like I was in the prison. I was just looking at it as a job.
I recall sort of walking up and down the very short hallway, which was the prison hall, and looking in on the prisoners, and they're basically lounging around on their beds. I felt it was like a day in summer camp.
The first day I said, this might be a very long, very boring experiment because it's conceivable nothing will happen.
I arrived independently at the conclusion that this experiment must have been put together to prove a point about prisons being a cruel and inhumane place. And therefore, I would do my part, to help those results come about. I was a confrontational and arrogant 18-year-old at the time, and, I said, somebody ought to stir things up a bit here.
On the second morning, the prisoners had decided to stir things up as well. The guards found some of them had used their beds to barricade their cell. Prisoner 8612 was one of the ringleaders of the rebellion.
Initially, I was stunned. I didn't expect a rebellion because not much happened. I mean, it wasn't clear what they were rebelling against, but they were rebelling against the status, rebelling against being anonymous, against having to follow orders from these other students.
As punishment for the rebellion, prisoner 8612 was put in the hole, and the guards turned on the other prisoners.
The guards felt that they now have to up the ante of being tough. The prisoners made the mistake of beginning to use profanity against the guards in a very...
You can see how fast. 2 days. Day number 2, the beginning of day number 2, there was already a revolt, and the guards were reacting by doing things like taking the beds out of the prison cell the quote-unquote prison cell, so the prisoners had to sleep on the floor. Day 2, and it already went down the crapper. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen, and we are going to get right back into it. Here we go. The Stanford Prison Experiment. I need my coffee.
Personalized way, so not against the guards, but you little punk, you big shit, and so, and the guards got furious.
Everybody out! Well, gentlemen, here it is time for count.
Prisoners were repeatedly woken in the middle of the night. The guards made them do menial, physical tasks and clean out toilets with their bare hands.
We made it a point to not give them any sense of comfort or what to expect, that anything could happen to them at any time, including being rousted from their sleep at any hour and forced to stand up in a line and have me hurl insults at them and make them do exercises. When you interrupt people's sleep, they tend to become a little disoriented. And since there was no daylight in the prison, they had no idea whether it was night or day. I think that I was the instigator of this whole schedule of harassment.
The harassment of the guards took its toll on rebellion leader 8612. He told Zimbardo he wanted to leave the experiment. Zimbardo responded not as a psychologist, but as a prison superintendent.
I said, well, I can see to it the guards don't hassle you personally, and in return, all I would like is some information from time to time about what the prisoners are doing. So essentially, I'm saying I'd like you to be a snitch, an informer. And I said, think it over, and if you still want to leave, fine.
Confused, prisoner 8612 returned to his cell and told the other prisoners that no one could leave.
He believed that we wouldn't let him go, although we've never said that. But the fact that he was the ringleader of the rebellion, and he told the other prisoners, they won't let you leave. And that really transformed the experiment into a prison.
I was told that I couldn't quit. And at that point, I just felt totally hopeless. More hopeless than I'd ever felt before.
Soon after returning to his cell, prisoner 8612 started showing signs of severe distress.
God damn it! Fucked up! You don't know! I mean, God! I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? I just fucking can't take it.
He came up with a plan that if he acted crazy, we would have to release him.
So fucked up inside. I feel really fucked up inside. You don't know. I gotta go. To a doctor, anything. I can't say that. I'm fucked up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all fucked up inside. I want out now.
It starts with make-believe, and then he's doing it and cursing and screaming and, whatever that little boundary is that he moved across. Not that he became really crazy, but he became, excessively disturbed. I mean, so much so that we immediately said we have to release him.
As an experience, it was unique. I've never screamed so loud in my life. I've never been so upset in my life. And it was an experience of being out of control.
The boundary between reality and make-believe was to become blurred even for Zimbardo. A rumor circulated that released prisoner 8612 would return with friends to liberate the remaining prisoners.
I quickly convinced myself that, my most important function was, not to allow this prison liberation to occur. And what can I do to keep my prison going, not the experiment going?
The prison was dismantled and the prisoners moved to another part of the building. Zimbardo waited in the empty corridor, preparing to tell 8612 and his friends that the study was over, when a colleague appeared and began asking questions about the scientific basis of the research.
I'm trying to get rid of him. And then he says, what's the independent variable? I get furious because he doesn't understand that there's a riot about to take place, that this prison is about to erupt. I had totally lost this whole other identity of scientist, researcher, psychologist.
The rumored jailbreak never materialized. The guards had dismantled the prison for nothing and had to rebuild it. They took their frustration out on the prisoners.
They escalated again the level of control, the level of dominance, the level of humiliating behavior.
819 was the next prisoner to rebel against the harassment of the guards. He barricaded himself in his cell and refused to take part in the count.
You're not only not getting a cigarette, but for as long as the cell's blockaded, you're going to be in solitary when you get out. I go, what?
For 819's disobedience, the guards made his cellmates do mindless work. This undermined any vestige of solidarity amongst the prisoners, who now chose to accept the tyranny of the guards rather than risk further harassment.
Which, by the way, is exactly how boot camp works, because the drill instructors do the same thing. If they see somebody that is acting out, they punish the group for that person's mistake. That way the group holds that person responsible when they're not around. And whether there's things are said or people in the group actually physically put hands on the person, it varies case by case. But that is a technique that is used in boot camp. So you see how this all correlates together. Now you understand why people in the military or police officers or even your idiot neighbor next door who thinks he's doing the right thing because he's told he's doing the right thing and his brain thinks it's doing the right thing. I just thought that important to point that out.
That was one of the surprising things to me, is that there was so little that the prisoners did to support one another after we started our campaign of, divide and conquer.
Isolated and distraught, prisoner 819 told Zimbardo he wanted to leave.
While I'm interviewing the 819 and saying, okay, it's all over. Thank you for your participation. I'll give you money for the whole 2 weeks, even though you're leaving early. He hears the prisoners shouting, 819 did a bad thing.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
And he said, I can't leave. And he's crying. And he says, I can't leave. So what do you mean you can't leave? He said, no, I have to go back because I don't want them to think that I'm a bad prisoner. And that's when I really flipped out. That in such a short time, a college student's thinking could become so distorted. I said, you're not a bad prisoner. You're not a prisoner. And this is not a prison. And it was this thing where he opened his eyes. It was just really like a cloud being lifted.
Seeing things clearly, prisoner 819 reverted to his original request and was released. To replace him, the experimenters called in one of their reserves from the standby list.
I got a phone call saying, are you still available as an alternate? Kind of cheery female secretary voice. I said, yes, sure. And so she said, could you start this afternoon? And I said, yes, sure. And my role in the experiment really began. I was blindfolded and then stripped and supposedly deloused.
He came into a madhouse, full blown. All of us had gradually acclimated to the increasing level of aggression, the increasing powerlessness of the prisoners, the increasing dominance of the guards. And he comes in and says, what's happening here to the other prison? And they said, hey, you better not make trouble. It's really terrible. It's a real prison. And he says, I'm out of here. I don't want to. And they said, no, you can't leave. Once you're here, you're stuck. This is a real prison.
416, you got your hands in the air. Why don't you play Frankenstein? 293, you can be the bride of Frankenstein. You stand here.
Prisoner 416 was soon subjected to the harassment of Dave Eshelman, nicknamed John Wayne because of his macho attitude.
416, and I want you to walk over here like Frankenstein and say that you love 293.
I made the decision that I would be as intimidating, as cold, as cruel as possible.
I love you, 293. Get up close. Get up close. I love you, 293. I love you, 293. You smile, 293. You get down here and do 10 push-ups.
Now, I want to point another thing out. Remember when the prisoner abuse outcry came out? Oh, my God. A bunch of rogue MPs were randomly abusing prisoners at Abu Ghraib. We don't do things like that. We wouldn't make them do simulated homosexual acts. That's not right. Really? Why is there an experiment from 1971? 1971. And they're doing the exact same dehumanizing things that those prison guards did at Abu Ghraib. Now tell me again, it was those E3s and E4s that masterminded this again, right? Yeah, no, there was nobody from any government agency or anything or any higher-ups telling them anything, right? No. We are back, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to bring up a point here really quick. In the chat room, I saw during the break, I glanced really quick. I think it was Rode and Bacon in the chat room. The two of them were having a conversation about prisons and about if somebody would, if the prisoners, I guess back during Y2K or something, and I had heard about this before, that there were prisons that were ready pretty much to shoot the prisoners rather than let them out. And that if in a, crap hitting the fan scenario, that there are prisons that have contingency plans like that. And people would say, well, why would they want to do that? I can't believe that a prison would want to do that. Well, let me explain something really quick. That's a really good analogy, and I'm glad that they brought that up, because that's a good physical example to you of what the oligarchy, we'll call it, the New World Order, whatever you want to call them, these elitist douchebags, how they're thinking. They think of us like prisoners, and they are the wardens, right? And they would rather kill us all than let us be free, because they are afraid of us, and they are afraid of what retribution would be brought against them for their crimes. Just like prison guards who, I'm not saying prisoners are awesome and that there's no violence amongst prisoners, but there are prison guards that abuse their power too. And perhaps them and the warden and any other officials there might be a little scared if the crap hit the fan, because if those prisoners were to be released, who knows what kind of retribution would be brought back to them. So I just thought that was a good example of what's going on a bigger scale with all of us, if you look at it. I just thought it was interesting. So thanks to Rode and Bacon and whoever else, if I missed somebody that brought up that point in the chat room, I appreciate it, guys. See, it is an interactive thing. Even when I am on air, I try to pay attention a little bit to what's going on in the chat, and I try to interact. And again, I always tell the listeners, I tell you all that you guys are an integral part of the show. Well, there you go. The listeners in the chat room today helped me bring about a point for anybody that hears it in the archive, the live broadcast, and it isn't in the chat, or hears it on the YouTube archive. So thanks, guys. Awesome job. All right, I'm going to get back to playing the clip, the Stanford Prison Experiment. Here we go.
I just watched a movie called Cool Hand Luke, and the mean, intimidating, Southern prison warden character in that film really was my inspiration for the role that I created for myself.
Why would we try to be obedient so much? It's my nature to be obedient, Mr. You would lie. You would speak and lie.
He was creative in his evil. He would think up very ingenious ways to degrade, to demean the prisoners.
What if I told you to get down on that floor and fuck the floor? What would you do then?
One of the best guards was also on that shift, and instead of confronting this bad guard, the sadistic guard, essentially because he didn't want to see what was happening, he became the gopher. He would go out to get the food and things of this kind, and that left the John Wayne guard and another guard on that shift to be dominant.
We were continually called upon to act in a way that just is contrary to what I really feel inside. And just continually giving out shit is just really one of the most oppressive things you can do.
416, while they do push-ups, you sing Amazing Grace. Ready? Down. Keep going. Grace. Push-ups on your own.
The madness of the experiment started to affect prisoner 416.
A wretch like me. Keep going.
I began to feel that I was losing my identity until finally I wasn't Clay. I was 416. I was really my number. And 416 was going to have to decide what to do.
Prisoner 416 decided to go on a hunger strike.
They were pushing my limits, but here was a thing that I could do that could push their limits. after I had missed a couple of meals, I saw that this was not a matter of indifference to the guards. I was making headway. They were upset.
I thought, how dare this newcomer come in and try to change everything that we had worked for the first 3 days to set up, and by God, he's going to suffer for that.
Get in that private then.
Frustrated by his continued defiance, John Wayne threw prisoner 416 into the hole. After punishing the other prisoners for his disobedience, John Wayne encouraged them to vent their anger at 416 directly.
Thank you, 416. Okay, 209. Thank you, 416.
We would use our nightsticks to bang on the door, and we would kick the door so hard that, it must have, shaken him very seriously inside, scared the life out of him.
He yelled at me and threatened me and actually sort of smashed a sausage into my face to try to get me to open up. But I didn't have any intention of eating until I was out.
Okay. Now,
416 should have been at some level a hero, because he's willing to oppose the authority of the system. In fact, the prisoners accept the guards' definition of him as a troublemaker.
I remember some of them saying, would you eat, goddammit? We're sick and tired of this. And, that was proof that, there was no solidarity, there was no support between the prisoners.
While 416 was still in the hole, John Wayne made a final attempt to break him by giving his fellow prisoners a choice. They could vote to release him by making a small sacrifice.
you can give me the blankets and sleep on the bare mattress, or you can keep your blankets and 416 will stay in another day. Now, what will it be? I'll keep my blankets. What will it be over here? I'll keep my blankets. How about 5486? I'll give you my blankets, Mr. Correctional Officer. You don't want a blanket. We got 3 in favor of keeping the blankets. We got 3 against 1. Keep your blankets. 416, you're going to be in there for a while. So just get used to it.
The study showed that power corrupts, and how difficult it is for people who are the victims of abuse to stand up and defend themselves. Why doesn't anybody who is being abused by a spouse or something like that just say, stop it? And we realize now that that's not as easy as it sounds.
By the end of the 5th day, 4 prisoners had broken down and been released. 416 was on the 2nd day of his hunger strike, and the experiment still had another 9 days to run. At this point, a fellow psychologist visited Zimbardo's basement prison and would witness the brutality of the experiment firsthand.
The guards had lined up the prisoners to go to the toilet, had bags over their head, chains on their feet, and were marching by. And I looked up and I saw this circus, this parade. And I said, hey, Chris, look at that.
I looked up and I just began to feel sick to my stomach. I had this just chilling, sickening feeling of watching this. And I just, I just turned away. And I just let loose in this emotional tirade. I just lost it. I was angry, scared. I was in tears.
And I'm furious. I'm saying, you're supposed to, we had a big argument. You're supposed to be a psychologist. This is this interesting dynamic behavior in such a few days. But I'm going through this whole thing, the power of the situation. She says, no, it's that young boys are suffering, and you are responsible. You're letting it happen. I said, oh my God, of course you're right.
The next day, Zimbardo ended the experiment. Studies like his stimulated heated debate about the ethics of using human subjects.
Clearly, young men suffered verbally, physically. Prisoners felt shame in their role. Guards felt guilt. So in that sense, it's unethical. That is, nobody has the right, the power, the privilege to do that to other people.
In the wake of experiments like Zimbardo's and Milgram's, ethical guidelines changed, introducing greater safeguards to protect participants. In the Stanford experiment, Zimbardo might have spared his volunteers distress had he not taken on a dual role in the study.
If I was going to be the prison superintendent, I should have had a colleague who was overseeing the experiment, who was in a position to stop it at any point, or I should have been the principal investigator and get somebody who was going to be the prison superintendent. I realized that was a big mistake, to play both those roles and be shifting back and forth.
After the experiment, Zimbardo brought all the participants together to talk about their experiences. John Wayne would now come face to face with the hunger striker he had tormented.
I was a little worried. I said, oh my God, he's really going to come down on me hard now, now that we're on equal footing.
It harms me.
How did it harm you? How does it harm you? Just to think about it, you mean that people can be like that?
Yeah. It let me in on some knowledge that I've never experienced firsthand. Because I know what you can turn into. I know what you're willing to do.
When I look back on it now, I behaved appallingly. It was just horrid to look at. I think I tried to explain to him at the time that, what you experienced and what you hated so much was a role that I was playing, but that's not me at all.
I love you, Jordan. He was trying to dissociate himself from what he had done. That did make me angry.
Yep. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will finish it because there's only about 3 minutes left. So I'll finish the rest of the Stanford Prison Experiment coming into hour number 2. And then I'm going to dovetail it with some stuff from Alan Watt. And we'll see how it all correlates together. So stand by. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on this live Sunday edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. Make sure you go check my website out. It is a plethora of information. And hour 1, I was discussing the Stanford Prison Experiment, and I was playing you the audio from a documentary titled The Stanford Prison Experiment. So you could hear for yourself audio right from the experiment that was actually recorded. This wasn't reenacted for this documentary. This was actually footage. The stuff that you've been hearing was actually recorded live during the experiment. If you go to federaljack.com, in the search bar, just type in The Stanford Prison Experiment, and I actually have an entire page dedicated to it. You can just click on it and load it up, and you can watch the movie. So you can go back and actually watch the video footage that goes along with the audio, and it's even more powerful when you see the video, and you realize that, again, these were just normal, everyday people that took part in this, and all of a sudden, within, again, day 2, things started to go down the crapper, as I said, first hour. So I want to finish playing the audio from that, and then I'm going to dovetail it with something else and some audio from Alan Watt to kind of drive the point home. But I want to finish up the audio from the Stanford Prison Experiment. It was about 3.5 minutes. And I rewound it a little bit just so it would pick up right where the one prison guard, the guy who played a prison guard and a quote-unquote prisoner, after they had come face to face, the one guy said, well, I tried explaining it wasn't me, it was just a role that I was playing. And I wanted to rewind it because what the guy who played the quote-unquote prisoner says in response to that is really on point. That's, I guess, the only way to put it. So I rewound it a little bit. Check this out.
I tried to explain to him at the time that, what you experienced and what you hated so much was a role that I was playing, but that's not me at all.
I love you, Jordan. He was trying to dissociate himself from what he had done. That did make me angry. Everyone was acting out a part and playing a role. Prisoners, guards, staff, everyone was acting out a part. It's when you start contributing to the script, that's you. And thus it's something you should take responsibility for.
I didn't see where it was really harmful. It was degrading, and that was part of my particular little experiment to see how I could...
Your particular little experiment.
Yes,
Why don't you tell me about that?
I was running little experiments of my own.
Tell me about your little experiment.
Okay.
I'm curious.
I wanted to see just what kind of verbal abuse that people can take before they start objecting, before they start flashing back.
If I have any regret right now, it's that I made that decision because it would have been interesting to see what would have happened had I not decided to force things. It could be that I only accelerated them, that the same things would have happened, but we'll never know.
If the extreme nature of Dave Eshelman's behavior tested the prisoners, it also presented the other guards with a choice to intervene or not.
It surprised me that no one said anything to stop me. They just accepted what I said, and no one questioned my authority at all. And it really shocked me. Why didn't people, when I started to get, abuse people so much, I started to get so profane that, and still people didn't say anything.
There were a few guards who hated to see the prisoners suffer. They never did anything which would be demeaning of the prisoners. The interesting thing is none of the good guards ever intervened in the behavior of the guards who gradually became more and more sadistic over time. We like to think there is this core of human nature that good people can't do bad things and that good people will dominate over bad situations. In fact, one way to look at the Stanford Prison Study is that we put good people in an evil place and we saw who won. Well, the sad message is, in this case, the evil place won over the good people.
It did show some very interesting and maybe some unpleasant things about human behavior. It seems like, every century, every decade that we go through, we're suffering the same kind of atrocities. And you need to understand why these things happen. You need to understand why people behave like this.
Now, that is one of the most important telling lines right there at the end, that it keeps happening over and over again, and we need to understand why it keeps happening over and over again. And that is true. That is true. We need to stop focusing on the symptom itself, that it is happening, and we need to study the causality, the why it is happening, and treat the actual problem rather than the symptom of the problem. But you've been lied to, I've been lied to, we've all been lied to as to what the problems are, right? Everybody tells us, well, I have the answer to the problems. Usually the establishment, whatever the case may be, government, doctor, whoever. I have the answer. Let me tell you what the answer to your problems are. No. You know what? Don't let somebody else tell you. What you need to do is you need to look inside yourself and first figure out what your demons are and what your issues are. And you need to face them. Don't try to make excuses for the things that you've done in the past if you've done really horrible things. Don't try to make excuses for it. Atone for it. Own up to it. Admit that you did the wrong and learn from it. It's a very powerful experience. You'll be surprised how much better you feel, and you'll be surprised how much more you grow. And by doing that and setting yourself on that path, okay, you, in turn, without even realizing, are emanating that type of energy outward. And it will cause others, without you even knowing it, to do the same thing. And, perhaps take on the same quest, the 100th monkey syndrome, and you won't even realize it. Perhaps in your quest, on your path, you end up doing a radio show or blogs or podcasts or whatever. And then your beacon just becomes a little more powerful. That's all. It's just like getting a bigger antenna. And you'll have effects that you don't even know. I get emails and messages sometimes, people I've obviously never heard of before. And out of nowhere, it'll be, I just want to let you know I've been listening to your show for a few months and, I really appreciate it, or I listened to this episode or that episode and it really helped me change my life, blah, blah, blah. That pushes me to even be better and bring more information out and push that, make that beacon, make my antenna taller, make my beacon more powerful so that people could pick it up further away. You never know the effect that you have, even just taking your own path. Not trying to go out and save the world. Just walking your own path. And unfortunately, as I said in hour number 1, if you are put in a bad situation, there are good people who are put in bad situations, and that black wolf, that dark side of us, gets fed more than the white light side of us. And what happens? Just like the old Indian said to the little Indian, it depends on which one you feed. Well, if the dark one is getting fed more, then obviously he's going to grow bigger and stronger. And if the light one isn't, well, then you're going to have a problem. So we need to start treating the the problems, not the symptoms. We need to start treating the actual problem, not the symptom to the problem. And if we actually start to change the way we think, again, that's why I brought up changing yourself, because this is how it starts. If we change the way we think at a base level, we won't be able to be manipulated like we are being manipulated right now. And we can stop this cycle. It's up to us to do something, because there is no Superman that's going to fly in and save us, ladies and gentlemen. We are Superman. We are Neo. We are the one. Let's take care of it. Let's get it done. We're going to break. We'll be right back. I'm going to give a big shout out to the listeners again in the chat room and the people that are just listening to the stream, however you're listening to it. Thank you for tuning in and listening. And I got to say, all of you, ladies and gentlemen, are on point. I'm glad that the people that are tuning in are taking this information and they're running with it and they're educating themselves. Because, like today, again, in the chat room, today's a very good interactive day for the chat. Because Bacon in the chat room basically said, well, one of the biggest problems he sees is people won't admit that, they won't admit to the problem or that there is a problem. And I've said this on air 100 times. And that's, fighting with the false ego. And he mentioned the ego, and their ego won't allow them to accept it. And he's on point. So very good. I just want to give another shout out because, see, I like to acknowledge when, I try to be as interactive as I can be. And I think it's really awesome that people are waking up. See, things like that, that's what drives me to continue to do this stuff. Because I don't get paid for any of this. I don't make any money off my radio show. I don't get anything from any of the advertisers on Orion. That's Jimmy's deal. I don't get that. The commercials pay for the airtime, so I don't have to. Jimmy lets the hosts do the shows for free. So, and that's because the sponsors like our shows. So I have nothing to do with any of those commercials. I make nothing. What drives me is when I see and hear people getting it and running with it. And just by having a conversation in the chat room, you guys are creating change because you guys are, brainstorming back and forth. And who the hell knows, you could go off tonight, Bacon, and have a conversation with somebody based off of something you guys, brainstormed in the chat room, and all of a sudden you had an epiphany and you realized a truth, or a road or anybody else. So, good job, good chat. Just wanted to give a big shout out again. As always, the listeners are an integral part of this. Because I'm not just up here grandstanding. I'm up here to give you the information so you can run with it and you can be your own, Popeye. You can be your own Joe Joseph, your own whoever. I'm not in this as a competition. I urge you all to do this. Maybe there's somebody out that can do it better than me. Tear it up. Go do a better show. Bring me on as a guest. I'll come on and chill out with you. I'll bring you on my show. I challenge you. Step up to the plate and do it yourself. All right. I want to get into Alan Watt as promised. I was talking about Alan Watt. And no, this isn't any audio from his radio show. I know Alan can be a tad bit dry on his radio show. Partially, it's not his fault. He does his radio show, I think, from a landline, I understand. And then there's the hum on the network that he does his show on, so that kind of dampens him down. But if you actually get a chance to listen to him with a good lapel mic, he's actually not as dry as one would think. And the guy is a fountain of information. Plus, he used to work in the music industry and things. So he has an understanding, a behind-the-scenes understanding, as it were, somewhat too. But he's a very astute individual. So I'm going to play a clip. It's the Prison Planet a couple of years ago Jones's crew went out to wherever the hell Watt is, out in Scotland or wherever he is, and they interviewed him. So I guess they could get good audio and video. And I have the audio from both the interviews, and this is the second part of the interview. But he's talking about Huxley all the way up to Brzezinski, and how these people are all connected and what's going on, and about how they manipulate things. And again, this ties into what I played with the Stanford Prison Experiment, because you could see just from experiment what happened and how easily people changed and how easily people were manipulated. And now I'm going to back that up with a little bit of Alan Watt. So here we go.
And I saw how culture creation worked from the top, and how generations were swayed into new fashions, new ideas. I've been following the histories of what's now called the New World Order for many, many years. And I try to go into the books written by the big players, the technocrats themselves, those famous people like the Kissingers, the Brzezinskis and so on, the Huxleys, the Lord Bertrand Russells, who all worked for the same organizations. And I came to the conclusion, really, there was only one big organization with many subcategories. These boys tended to publish the world that they saw coming into view, and they wrote it in their own hand, basically. They told us where they were taking the world. And when you start studying these things about the age of 14, 15, or even younger, and reading their books, and you live long enough, you will see that the world has turned out exactly as they planned. This can't be coincidence. And who can really write up a wish list and make it happen globally, unless there is an organization very, very powerful, probably the only organization really on the planet, an organization that can fund all sides, all oppositions, and using the synthesis of conflicting parties, they can literally make the world come into view as they planned. They plan in centuries, and the astonishing thing is when you go into the United Nations, which was loosely based on the Soviet system, they plan certain parts of their agenda in 50-year plans, some in 100-year plans, and some even in 150-year plans for different aspects of it. The Russells, the Huxleys, and so on, Brzezinskis, also use the same terminology with their long-term plans. And you've got to understand, too, that nothing in culture comes out from the grassroots. Even Plato talked about that thousands of years ago. He said that if it was a grassroots movement really coming from the people, then those in charge, the dominant minority, would lose control. Therefore, every change in culture, right down to fashion and music, and this was written 2,300 years ago, had to be authorized from the top and promoted from the top if it fitted with the continuance of control over the public. And these are sciences which were taught down through the ages, are still taught today to the big players, and they've used it to the full in the 20th century, now into the 21st century with the use of television, mass communications, radio, etc. Everything has been given to us for the appropriate time and stage in the actual planning. And for those who are coming into this kind of study, it's best to go into the books, as I say, written by the big players themselves. They love to boast. Kissinger's got lots of books out there, so has Brzezinski. These are probably two of the master players in geopolitics. Try to stay away from all the conspiracy books. They're also put out there on purpose, very fascinating books, but they'll lead you in circles forever without giving you the overall picture to the fact that every generation has a purpose up until this present time. And in a post-industrial era, these big boys have decided, and their masters too, that we are simply superfluous and they no longer need us. Hence, we have big foundations coming forward and organizations like the Optimum Population Trust who have decided to come out openly and demand that governments start radically reducing the populations. We are now the useless eaters, as Lord Bertrand Russell called us. Our ideas, our opinions on everything our worldview, even to do with population and the fake view that we're overpopulated, is all projected to us by the mainstream media working in concert for their masters. And we begin to parrot what we hear through repetition.
That's exactly right. I'll stop it there. I'll pick it right up coming out of the break on the other side. I won't even talk. I'll just pick it right up with Alan Watt. And I'm going to rewind it about 5 seconds so you can hear again what he just said. People learn from repetition. That's why when you try to have an intelligent conversation with somebody and they start spewing Fox News or CNN or MSNBC talking points, that's why. Controlled. We'll be right back.
Working in concert for their masters, and we begin to parrot what we hear through repetition, and that's so important, is repetition with slogans and catchphrases. And once you hear it happening in your own local group, your milieu, then you know it's working. And the camera can make anything appear to be true. You'll see that in India, for instance, they always use the same streets of Bombay to make you think that you're massively overcrowded, and that's the impression people think of the entire Indian continent. The Indian continent is huge, with thousands and thousands of miles of forest where no one lives. It's the same in Africa too. China, being the model state for the world, for instance, put into effect the United Nations policy to the extreme with its population reduction and the movements of people off of the rural areas into cities. They started that years ago. Right now, they're in the process of moving 200 million more people off into the major cities, and that's the major newspapers. The cities appear to be crowded because everyone's being moved into them. In the Western world, since the 1950s, again under the term of urban sprawl and stopping urban sprawl, the Western countries also signed agreements to do no more building in the outskirts and of the major cities. All existing buildings have to be used or else knocked down and replaced with even higher ones. But regardless, with the immigration and the free flow of people now from third world countries, the Western countries appear to be overcrowded. And yet the UN's own statistics show, and so the national census show, that the Europeans, for instance, Canadians and Americans who have been here for a couple of hundred years are actually in decline. So the overpopulation problem is simply an image projected by the media as more and more people are crammed into the same cities and they bring more immigrants in to fill them. But I also realized the system of schooling when I was going to school was bogus. The histories were bogus, and I was very, very lucky to have access to very old libraries, town libraries. Some of them had reference books going back into the 1700s, written at the time. When you compared the histories I was being taught in school to the histories that were written at the time, they were completely different. You had a deeper understanding of how geopolitics had been used in the past to even populate the country of Canada. London couldn't get immigrants to go off into the new colonies. What they did for Australia was to create so many laws that you couldn't help but break them, and poverty. And therefore, stealing a loaf of bread to feed you or your family would get you deported to Australia with your family. That's how they populated Australia. Crime. They created the laws for crime. With Scotland, they had a rebellion, which could have been rigged, and I often think it was, and the whole of Scotland was punished. And they deported millions of the Scots off to the Americas to populate the Americas. This is geopolitics in action. That's how it works. And whole peoples are often moved from their land because the elite masters want them elsewhere to be productive for them, themselves, the masters. When you look at the strategy for the US and Canada, again, long-term strategy, long-term planning, you'll find that the big corporations of their day, the Hudson's Bay companies, the Fraser companies, were given charters to own the land before Canada was Canada or US was the US. They were simply called the Americas. These are private international corporations They had the power of life and death over everyone who lived within their areas. The Queen or the King had a consulate in every country, Lieutenant General or Governor General, they call them. We still have one in Canada today who represents the Queen. They have all the powers over life and death of subjects under that governor. How they stopped rebellion in the past was to give us an idea of what they called democracy. They knew from the Chartist movement in Britain, for instance, and elsewhere, other countries, people were demanding rights for the first time. And so once again, they gave us champions to speak on our behalf, which calmed the people down, thinking for the first time in history, the people were involved in their own destiny creation. And nothing was further from the truth. Because the planners knew that once you bring people into a country or a continent, create real wealth for them and get businesses going, clear the land, drain the swamps, and so on, they can take it all away from you through laws 200 years down the road. And that's what's happening now. Long-term geopolitics once more. And if you think I'm kidding about this, go into the history books written at the time. They're still there in some of the libraries. And you can also go into the art of geopolitics. There's even videos on YouTube on Brzezinski boasting about how he set up the Taliban in Afghanistan. You'll see him encourage them to fight the Soviets at that time in the 1970s. And he actually says, yours is a holy war. This man, who obviously believes in nothing but himself and his own peer group, is encouraging other people to go and fight a holy war, a jihad. And he uses these terms against the Soviets, knowing full well, once it was set up and it was backed by the CIA, that 10, 15 years down the road, there'd be a problem. And then they'd have to go to war with the very group they'd created to fight the Soviets. That's what's happening today. Long-term strategies. Well, that's how history has always been run. If you can go into the books where you find the British Home Office is mentioned, study the history of the diplomatic corps. Because the diplomats were spies. They would go into territories, set up embassies, collect intelligence data for future invasions. Their job was also to try and grab the rights of minerals, gold, silver, etc. across the planet. All natural resources. And find ways, long-term strategy, to either bribe it off the present rulers of those countries or else create an ultimate war with them and simply steal it under the guise of occupation. We're living through a stage today, as I say, where this is all coming to a culmination. This is the post-industrial era. We're post-technical almost in the West. It's all done in other countries, all the technical stuff. And Brzezinski himself talks about the technocratic era, where the future will be for an elite with a highly trained bureaucracy underneath them and scientific elite who will not need the human labor that they've needed in the past. Human labor that is excessive and is unemployed and is hungry is now a threat to that established elite. So now they're doing something which they can only do to the human species. They don't need to do this with animals. With animals, just go out and hunt them and kill them. We are the only species that has to be convinced to allow ourselves, for the good of all, to be sterilized and bring down the population through abortion on one end and euthanasia on the other, under the guise to save the planet. And unfortunately, with the massive propaganda campaigns that are all over media in every country at the same time, with all the big foundations backing them with unlimited financing. Remember, the foundations are owned by the international bankers themselves. Then they can pull all of this off, and unfortunately, it really is working. In kindergarten now, you walk into a kindergarten anywhere in Europe or Americas, and you'll see the rainbow inside every single one of them. You'll see all the terms about the world. Here's the globe, we're all global. And you'll see the greening messages everywhere, and how sacrifice will have to be made to save the world and the planet and future generations of society. Sacrifice. You tie that together with the institutions that were comprised of the The Fabian Society was a member of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. That's one society. The Council on Foreign Relations is also the same thing as the Royal Institute for International Affairs. They are what Thatcher and Professor Carroll Quigley called the parallel government. They have told us what the future is going to be. Some of their members have even written books about the need to cull off massive amounts of the population by any means possible. And so we see this final stage being pushed as they convince us that we are the problem. The Club of Rome, that also belongs to the same group, in the 1990s, the two founders said that back in the 1970s at the Club of Rome, they were given the task as a premier think tank for the globe, this global society.
All right, I'm going to pause it right there. Final segment coming up. I'm going to play a few more minutes of Alan Watt, and then I'll wrap it up. But you see how I'll show you how it all correlates. We'll be right back. I'm sure you've already heard it, figured it out yourselves.
Task, the premier think tank for the globe, this global society. The task to find ways of reducing the population and controlling the people to go along with this, convincing the public how to go along with it. And they said they'd looked at all possible means of doing so. What had worked before? Again, geopolitics, strategy. Under warfare conditions, the public will give up freedom. The public will be directed by governments, bureaucracies, and police, military, etc. Under warfare, the public sacrifice. They'll have less food, they'll ration stuff. They go along with it to save themselves. Therefore, they'd have to find a warfare strategy, a reason for war. And what they came up with was that man was the enemy of the planet. They said the idea that global warming could be created and blamed upon mankind would fit the bill. These are the words they used. That would fit the bill, written in the 1970s, and decided at the think tanks then, and published by the guys involved in a book called The First Global Revolution, well worth reading. When they hit upon an idea from a premier think tank, they will never change that agenda. I've said before, it wouldn't matter if we're up to our eyes in snow all year round. They will still stick to global warming. That's the agenda. Now, of course, they've changed it slightly to climate change, which simply means changes in the weather. And they're in the process now of convincing the general public to be afraid of summer, for instance. It's all done through the alteration and distortion of perceptions. Massive psychology is used on all of this. And they certainly understand mass psychology of the general public. These boys don't simply announce things or make up a wish list of the future and send it up the chimney to Santa Claus. When they come up with an idea, they implement it. I've followed the United Nations Department of Statistics as they announce every single year the sperm count of the Western male, which has been falling drastically since the 1950s. They say that it's down by about 75–85%. Now, when something like that's happened across the whole of Europe and the Americas in 50 years, and they suddenly started noticing it 50 years ago, sudden onset, and there's no crisis made about it. There's no comeback after announcing the statistics. They just tell you the cold, hard statistics and go off to the next statistic on some other topic. That means it's part of the agenda. Otherwise, it would be a crisis. If this wasn't planned and part of the agenda, believe you me, it would be a crisis if they didn't authorize it. And now they tell us that the average American has less than 20% sperm and only about 15% is motile. That's not a coincidence. What happened in the 1950s to start out this ball rolling? In the 1950s, they suddenly put all the known female synthetic estrogens into food supply. They put it in baby foods. Procter & Gamble were the first one to admit, after investigation 40 years later, that they were using a rinse to supposedly sterilize the baby bottles and it contained bisphenol A. An odd thing to rinse baby bottles with, when bisphenol A is the very thing that attacks young male children at that age and stops the testes from developing properly. You go back even further into more detail, and you find out that the cosmetic industry were using insufflatants. Insufflation is a technique where certain carriers are put into the creams themselves, and these creams then absorb into the skin, carrying other chemicals with them. They're almost like they carry the payloads into the target in the bloodstream. We find that the women were highly toxic with the artificial bisphenol A and other ingredients. And therefore, within the first 8 to 12 weeks of pregnancy with a male child, there's a very good chance that male would grow up to be either almost completely sterile or, to say, maybe have some motile sperm. This was all understood 50 years ago. Bisphenol A, for instance, was discovered in the 1890s, and the properties it had against humans, especially males, was known then too.
Now you see, as I said in hour one, how they study this stuff, not 10, 20, but 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, even 100 years in advance. And that's how, going back, and that's how far they plan ahead. So if this stuff was planned 100 years ago, can you imagine what they've planned today for the next 100 years? Now, the reason I wanted to play as much of this clip as I could, and I think you can probably find it on YouTube. Just look up Alan Watt InfoWars or something like that, in the search line, and I'm sure it'll come up. There's two of them, or you could always... Yeah, I'm sure it's on Jones's YouTube channel too, I think, because I think that's where I actually got the audio from. But just look up Alan Watt, Prison Planet, InfoWars, whatever, and it'll come up. And it's the second hour. I urge you to watch both, but it's the audio I was playing is from the second part of the interview, part two, I guess you could say. I don't want to say second hour, but part two. And the reason I wanted to cram as much of it in there as I could is because I want to show you, first I wanted to show you how not only do they know how to manipulate people, but I wanted to show you the example by letting you listen to the audio from the Stanford Prison Experiment. Over 40 years ago, this thing was conducted, okay? So they already know it. There's a big example right there. Now, they know how to manipulate people. I showed how even good people put in bad situations could be turned bad and could do bad things, right? Now, Alan Watt here is, he talked about how that very thing was planned a very long time ago. And now you see this push for the culling, as they call it, the great culling, and, a call to work for, come join DHS or come join whatever, be part of Barack Obama's civilian army workforce, whatever, be a member of the Green Police, whatever. And they're trying to push this whole myth that man is like a parasite now. And again, just like you saw in the Stanford Prison Experiment, okay, or you heard, rather, people can be manipulated, and even not so much by other people, just by their surroundings. Imagine if someone knows that and knows how to not only manipulate the individual, but manipulate the surrounding of the individual to guarantee an outcome. And that is what's going on today. That is how this quote-unquote green agenda, we have to get rid of man. That's how all of this stuff is being pushed. That's how people are actually brainwashed into thinking that humans are bad. I've had conversations with morons like that. Humans are bad. I said, you're human, right? Well, yeah, but I'm trying to expose the disease. So I said, oh, so you're the exception to the rule. Okay, I get it. So all humanity is bad except for you. So most of these morons, some of them actually would support taking out their own family. But I've met some of them that are just idiots and don't think. When actually presented with, factual evidence and forced to use logic, if they do use logic, usually end up going, wow, I was a moron. And the ones that don't, usually are the ones that really buy into it because they are at a level either so brainwashed that it's too late, or some people just, there is some bad people, you know. The bad side has been fed more than the good side their whole life. Maybe the bad side was bigger than the good side to begin with. Whatever the case may be, you know, you're not going to save everybody. But the point I want to drive home is education. Educate yourself. Because if you don't, you will be manipulated like I've showed you. You can be manipulated. How a situation can be manipulated to manipulate you without you even knowing it. Because you're not going to look at it and say, wow, come on, there's not that level of things going on. Yes, there is. Because there are people that have been studying this for a much longer period of time because they have an agenda. And the only way to get that agenda through is if you actually willingly do it. And as we've seen through war crimes and just at the bombings with the drones, everything, you know, invasions, occupations, as we've seen, people are capable of doing things that if they actually sat down and logically thought about it, they probably wouldn't do. And again, that's why there's such a high rate of suicide in the military. What's even scarier is 50% of the suicide rate is people that weren't deployed in combat. Now that tells you that these people realize that something's wrong when they're in, and then they think they're screwed and all hope is lost because of the opposition they face and because of the atmosphere. Again, the atmosphere that's created, the environment. And they're manipulated by that environment, sometimes in a really negative way, and they end up taking their life because they think there's no other option. And that brings me back to my original point of we need to fix the problem, not the solution. The problem being the culture and the way we think. We need to change it up. We need to evolve. And that'll stop a lot of this. I'm out of time, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I was able to wrap everything up and tie it up in a nice bow for you. Thank you for listening. I'll see you again on Wednesday. If everything goes well, it will be my Charlotte Thompson Iserby interview, so stay tuned for that. And stay tuned for Joe's show. I'm going to be a guest there. A few interesting topics, so don't go anywhere.